hearing from a variety of speakers, really brave souls. For Mara Cruz, Adam, Barcan, Kevin Wolkober, Johan Garcia, Jonathan Martinez, and Sam Kelly. And last but not least, we're also gonna have a nice commercial break with Brian Hugh. He actually facilitated some of our Zoom breakout rooms, which I don't wanna ruin the surprise. So you'll have to stay tuned for the really cool commercial break as we're continuing to move on. So just wanted to do a check here. Is Mara on the line? Do a quick check. Okay. Well, we could go ahead and put Adam Barcan on the spot. Adam, are you there? I saw your smiling face earlier.
Hello, yes, I am here.
Awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen and you could take it over.
Cool. And I think Mara, there was in the invite, there was a Google Meet, and I just saw her there. So I hopped on and Google chatted her to join here. So we'll see if she hops on. I think that was the issue.
Got it. Okay, thanks for pointing that out.
Cool. All right, but I can do my talk. So let me just share here.
Sounds great.
Cool. Okay, and all right. Cool. Everybody see my screen okay? And you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Hey, so I will do a brief talk here. My name is Adam. I'm going to talk about a little bit of front-end development and specifically why I really like this concept called styled components over the more traditional concept of a CSS style sheet. So just a super quick intro. I work at Greenhouse, which some of you may have used in your jobs. We're like a recruiting and onboarding platform. I spent like 4.5 years there as a full stack engineer. So just like building features, fixing bugs, dealing with angry customers when we broke stuff, like all that. And I mostly worked in Ruby on Rails and a variety of JavaScript libraries. JavaScript evolves very quickly, but for the past couple years, it was React. Before that, it was Angular, Backbone, Marionette, jQuery, and a host of other more outdated technologies. This year, I switched to DevOps, which is the least CSS-specific job you can have. So I think I won't be qualified to give this talk much longer. But about a year ago, I'd say I was working on some front-end work, and I ran into like an interesting bug around CSS that kind of frustrated me. So I wrote this blog post that's linked. I can send it in the Zoom chat after. And then this talk is based on the blog post, kind of how I found some frustrations with style sheets and how I fixed them with styled components. Okay, so let's jump into it. I learned to code like a lot of people just by building like simple static websites. This is a one-page site I made like 5 years ago because I was doing an open water swim and I needed to do some fundraising. I just discovered today, 5 years later, the site is actually still up and working, even though I haven't maintained it in 5 years. So that's kind of funny, but you can go to it if you want. It doesn't do very much. But if we were to look at the code behind this site, again, it's a very simple one-page site, and the code itself is also very simple. And I'd call this a traditional code organization for a front-end site. So you have a single HTML page here, you have a single CSS style sheet, and you have a little bit of JavaScript. They're all in separate files. So you have HTML file, CSS file, JavaScript file, and the styling is achieved through global CSS classes. A good example, if we look actually on the main.css, we see this section class, and we see a background with my splash image. And if you go into sort of the main div in the body of the HTML page, you can see this section tag, and that is providing all the styling that pretty much this whole body of the page has. And obviously, if I had a second page and put in that same section class, it would get a lot of the same styling, although there's some complexities, but basically you're getting all this stuff and it's available globally in your app. Okay, fast forward. At Greenhouse, I did not really write code that looked like the code I just showed you. So in 2020, or say modern web development, it's pretty common to use the idea of a reusable component. React is the library we chose. There's also Vue.js and a couple others, but React is probably the most popular. The idea here is that you make a reusable component, and the goal is that it has deterministic behavior. What I mean by that is I have here this JavaScript function. It's a component called control panel. In the wild, like on a real page, it looks like this thing at the bottom. So you can see there's an edit button. If I were to click edit, there would be some behavior. In this case, it would expose some dropdowns. And again, because we're dealing with candidates, you would be able to filter some candidates using department location and other stuff. What's interesting here is instead of having such like a separate concept of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, the goal of React is this JavaScript function is actually returning a mix of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it's like I write some JavaScript, and what I get is everything I need to render this component on the page. So if you look carefully at what this JavaScript function returns, you can see it looks like HTML. I see a div, I see a label. I also see some CSS, like a class name control panel. And you can't really see it, but there's also some JavaScript on the page. And by JavaScript, I mean like interactivity. So for example, this onClick, I can pass in some behavior, and that behavior would happen when I clicked on this edit button. And again, because the goal of this is to make a reusable component, maybe there's different behavior depending on what page you're on, but I still want most of the look and feel and the logic to be the same and to be reusable. That's the goal anyway. Okay. The question is, will the styling look the same on every page? So I thought it should, and I remember like a year ago, it was kind of late at night, I'm trying to get my work done. I was very happy to find somebody else had written this control panel component, and I was like, great, this is exactly what I need for my page. You know, all I have to do is take this thing, you know, pass in these 3 criteria that it takes, onboarding criteria, button text, and onClick. Everything else should just kind of work, and I'm so happy. It saved me all this work of writing this thing myself. That is actually not what happened. When I used it on my page, I don't have a screenshot of how it looked, but it did not look like this. It looked pretty much unstyled. So I knew the styling was broken. And so when I went to debug it and figure out what was going on, I realized that something was messed up around this CSS class control panel. So it's worth thinking a little about, if you take my example of like the simple web page that I made for my swimming site that had a single style sheet, in a complex production app, it won't be exactly like that. In reality, the pattern that we followed before styled components was for every feature, so roughly every page, more or less, we would have a separate style sheet. That is purely from the point of view of code organization. So you can imagine the first control panel was on a page called candidates. Maybe it had some candidates you could filter or something, right? So they called their style sheet candidates.css.scss. And you can ignore the SCSS for now. Just think of it as a CSS style sheet. The problem is, in production, all these many style sheets are kind of rolled up into a single style sheet. So the browser only sees one style sheet, even though the developer may know there are many in the app. This is kind of not worth getting into, but the reasons are it's a little more efficient. You save like literally the size of the code in the browser, so it's faster. It's really for like performance reasons. But the problem with that is that if you ever thought about what the cascading, like CSS means cascading style sheets, right? Cascading is kind of the idea of like, it's cascading down the style sheet. And so if you have 2 classes that overwrite each other, the bottom class will like win. So the problem there is that if you have a big production app with lots of style sheets, it's quite possible 2 developers could use the same class twice without even knowing about the other ones. So imagine you have 2 style sheets that are being imported into this application, which is like the master style sheet that's actually used in production, and they both have a class called control panel. Will the color of the font be red or blue? I don't know. It kind of just really is non-deterministic, and it kind of just depends on like which one is imported last. So that's not so great. Developers know this is a problem, and so they try and get around the problem by adding additional CSS classes. So in this case, you could think of candidates.css as the original style sheet that somebody else wrote and I discovered. And they were trying to be smart, and they knew that somebody might clobber their control panel class, so they namespaced it, meaning they wrapped it in another class called .candidates. That's the problem. That's not really intuitive to me because maybe my page doesn't need this .candidates class. So and the thing is, like, I copied this code verbatim from where I'd seen it used elsewhere. The problem is, this component could be somehow embedded inside another part of the page. Maybe the whole page has like a master class called .candidates. So it's really like magical and not very intuitive when you try and reuse this. That was why my style broke. If I'd wanted the styling to work, I would have had to wrap my code in this .candidates class, and I didn't really want to do that. So I'd heard of this thing called styled components, and I thought they could solve my problem. What are styled components? It is a library. So you can see I'm importing the styled components library into my code. All it does is it allows you to kind of embed CSS inside your HTML. What I mean by that is, this should look familiar, a div. It's a very common HTML component. And this style div is a styled component. So all I've done is I've wrapped my div and I've given it some styling. And then if you go back to the original code, you were seeing I'm using kind of raw HTML elements, div, label, div, etc. Here I'm not. I'm using the styled components that I created right here. So my style div has its own styling kind of baked in, as well as my style label. So now when you reuse this control panel component, you're getting the styling baked in and it's defined right here, and I can see exactly what it is. Under the hood, they're doing some very clever things with CSS classes that I don't really have to get into, but they do a very careful job of making sure that no styled component can overwrite another styled component using some ways to generate like random class names. But it's clever and it really works well. So that's it, basically. I guess if you want to sum up, traditional web development uses separate files for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Your styling is through global classes. This carries the risk of overwriting the style or having to use like very specific classes to get the style right. It's very hard to reuse code. It is very easy to get started. It has a shallow learning curve, so it's good for small projects, or it's a good way to ramp up and kind of see like the building blocks of your code. But in production, I'm not using it. I would use React or another JavaScript library plus styled components. The difference is your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are all defined in the same file. The CSS is local to your code, to your JavaScript. It's very easy to reuse code in a way that I have confidence is deterministic. So my logic, my markup, and my styling are all, I know if I use it in two places, it'll look and feel exactly the same. Definitely a steeper learning curve. You have to learn a lot of external libraries. But in my opinion, this is the way to go if you're doing something that's more complex. I think I'm done. Awesome. Why don't we save time for the next speaker? But if you have questions, feel free to do a Zoom chat or hit me up on LinkedIn or GitHub. The blog post this is based on is a little earlier in the presentation. I'll put that in the chat. And this is documentation if you want to get really into the weeds of styled components. So thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, we're gonna come back around for questions. Usually, if anybody does have any questions, feel free to type it up in the chat, just so that we're not losing track of it. But I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our next speaker who has signed up with us, Mara Cruz. And she is able to find us on Zoom, so I'm very happy. She is the Digital Product Production Director at Informa Markets. And she's going to be giving a talk for us about the strategy for interactive content.
Okay, hi, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Can everybody hear me? Oh, okay, great. I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Perfect.
Okay. This out of the way. Okay, if everybody can just bear with me, I'm sitting in my car. I lost power today, so things aren't going to be as smooth as I had planned. So I hope everything works out. Okay, my name is Mara Cruz, and the topic that I'm going to be talking about is called Strategy for Interactive Content. And let's kick this off with an introduction to content strategy as it applies to digital content. What are we trying to accomplish? And looks like I lost power. All right. Everybody can still hear me. I'm not going to be able to do this today. It's just everything is just working against me, and I'm going to upload my presentation as well as my transcript to that Google Doc, and I'm going to have to do this either another time or just never. So I just apologize for not being able to follow through.
No problem at all, Mara. I think somebody had earlier on asked what's going on, like what's the craziest storm story from today. So I definitely commend you for being able to sign in from Burger King or from your car to join us and say hello.
Yeah, I think if I had a place to charge my laptop, I would have been able to pull it off, but my laptop just died calling in from my phone. So I'm just gonna listen in so I can at least listen to what everybody else has to say. And like I said, I'll just post my presentation to that Google Doc if anybody wants to look at it. May take me a couple of days till I get my power back and whatever. But anyhow, sorry, and thank you everybody for, you know, putting up with me as much as you have.
Yeah, I will DM you to see if there's any way that I could maybe help you project something. So I'll talk with you offline. But for the meanwhile, we can move on to our next speaker and our next topic, which is Kevin Wolkober. And he is a senior software engineer lead at Squarespace. And his topic is designing and creating on iOS in real time with Xcode previews.
That's right. Hi, everybody. So I'm Kevin. I'm a mobile software engineer and also kind of semi-designer in that I have side project apps on the store that I design myself to the best of my ability. And what's helped a lot with that is the thing I'm going to show you today. So today I want to show you a really neat way you can kind of quickly design and prototype apps for iPhone and iPad using Apple's software development tool, Xcode. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to make some design changes in real time. Let me find, wow, there's a lot of windows here. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. And, oh boy, I might have to jump back into this. I have to grant permissions to the Mac to be able to share my screen. I will be right back in just a second.
Okay, Kevin, are you still on? Nope, he's not. So I would jump over to Brian for our commercial break for now, but I don't want Kevin to sign back in and be jarred and be like, where did everyone go? So we'll give him a second, and maybe for now we could talk about the storm. As you can see, just like super sunny outside for me right now. Anybody have any crazy stories that happened to them, or like things that happen in their neighborhood?
I don't have a crazy story, but I pretty much just stay home all day and just being really cozy. a very I guess representative story for most people.
Okay, so it looks like Kevin is back with us. Kevin, you good?
I'm good. Sorry about that. New laptop, had not enabled Zoom to share a screen yet. So I'm going to go ahead now, and hopefully this will work as intended. I'm just going to find my Xcode window. Here we go. All right. Everybody see my screen okay here?
Yep.
Great. All right. So what you're looking at here, basically, you know, in the last year, well, so to show you what we're looking at here, this is called Xcode. This is what most iOS developers use to program and create apps for the iPhone and iPad. And so last year, Apple introduced this great new feature called Xcode Previews, which lets you, as you write code, see design changes in real time in your UI, which is pretty neat and a lot faster than having to write some code, build, run, and back and forth. And it's especially helpful for working alongside just designers together to be able to tweak and make changes and kind of realize things a little more quickly in prototype. So aside from writing code, I'm actually also a cocktail enthusiast at home, love to make cocktails, and I've been toying with the idea for a cocktail recipe app, at least recently. So if you look here, I'm getting started on designing this drink detail view. It's a view that you might end up at if you're coming from a list of cocktails, you might tap in. And today I picked the Negroni, one of my favorite cocktails, and we can use it as some great static content as we prototype out a design for this. So as you can see, it consists of a title, ingredients, directions, and a picture of the drink. It's pretty straightforward. The design's nothing stellar, but we can maybe punch it up a little bit. On the left side, you'll see this is the code. This is Swift UI, which is also new in the last year, and it's referred to what's called a declarative UI in terms of like what you kind of write is what you get in terms of like you see a skeleton, somewhat similar to HTML if you're familiar with web. And the way it's structured, it kind of comes out on the right side. It's a little more condensed than the way we traditionally program apps and other things using imperative programming. But that's not important. Let's get to the fun stuff. So I can go ahead and modify code and start to punch this up. So if you see the ingredients and all the text, it's kind of, it all blends together, right? We maybe want a little bit, some of this to stand out better. So we can, go ahead and italicize. It's not bad. Maybe we can punch up the font size of the ingredients and, why don't we bold it and even gray it out a little bit. Right now it's a little bit more separate, a little more distinct, but maybe that's not enough. Maybe we can go down here and apply a border. And it's a little bit rounded, make it stand out even more, since that's what maybe people are here for when they want to make their drink. And I like that nice big image, but I kind of would prefer I applied the same padding as the content above it and also a similar quarter radius. So you can see as I'm changing the code, instantly it changes right on the right side there, making it really easy to make changes. But that's not enough. Today we're looking at this simple, basic screen, right? But there's so many new features and things to consider. People use apps different ways, right? So what's great about this is we can preview not only in this basic mode, but we can actually, as we write code, preview it a bunch of different ways at the same time. So when I make these changes, now I can know, what does this look like in dark mode for people who are using dark mode? Things like, when people are using accessibility features like dynamic type, larger fonts, does the font, expand, or does the text expand the way we expect without truncation? Here's an example of, wow, the font's really large for a certain type of accessibility user and it shrinks that image down there. Probably need to think about a better way to handle that. And you can even go as far as injecting different languages, different kinds of text are longer and shorter, and you also want to make sure all of that kind of gracefully adapts with the design, and what it might even look like in other languages you're not familiar with to really make sure that it feels the way you want to in various environments in different ways. So, the Xcode preview thing is really great and really easy to implement for developers for the most part. And so it's a tool I kind of recommend both developers and designers use together to effectively create a great app. And that's Xcode previews. If you have any questions, happy to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I guess I'm curious to see what your thoughts are for a designer to have access to the code base and kind of commit their changes and yeah, just thoughts about that.
Sure. I would say if your app has a really well-defined design system implementation, if you work with a designer to translate the design system to the app itself in terms of predefined, lines of code and things that would be very easy for designers to pull in, I would say that's a totally feasible thing to do. Yeah.
Cool. Does anybody on the line have any questions for Kevin?
Yeah, was the language conversion happening automatically, or did you copy that in for demoing? That's really cool.
I copied that in for demoing. Yeah, we can even,
Okay.
type anything in real time and it'll still do the same changes. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, Kevin.
Sure. I will stop sharing. There we go.
Cool. All right. So we're kind of at the point where we are ready for a quick commercial break, but it is a working break because we're actually going to have Brian take over and tell us a little bit about speed meet and greets. And we're going to actually get into some Zoom breakout rooms. So get ready to break out your smiles for networking.
All right, so can anyone hear me? Everyone
Yes.
hear me? Okay, cool. Great. So what we're going to do now is just, if you were here on our last meetup, I'm just going to break people off into breakout rooms, and you can hopefully meet someone new, or if you already know them, hopefully this is a good time to like catch up. If you have any problems, feel free to DM me and I'll help you sort them out. I'm not going to meet anyone this time. Last time I was also participating. This time I'm just going to sit in the lobby and troubleshoot problems if they occur. So in a second here, I'm going to break you out into breakout rooms, and we'll give you 10 minutes to meet one another and just chat it out.
Is there a way that I can go
Alright.
into a breakout room if I'm just on the phone?
Yes, Mara, you'll be assigned into a breakout room. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, no problem. I just have to fix this breakout room because okay. 1 second.
I actually like really enjoyed the last meetup we had, because like literally 10 minutes just like flies by, and especially like when you're in a container like this with so many people, sometimes it's hard to feel human, and you know, just like making a connection with someone is really precious right now.
All right, cool. I'm ready to get started, so I will open the breakout rooms and you can chat with each other. The breakout rooms will automatically close in 10 minutes.
So yeah, I'm just super happy that, you know, our speakers were able to give some time to really give thought about, like 5 minutes might, even 10 minutes might seem like a really like short time, but it does take a lot of thought in order to put that in there. So without further ado, I'm going to present our next speaker. Johan Garcia is a product designer over at Facebook, and he's going to be giving up some quick portfolio review tips.
Hey, can you guys hear me? So I'm gonna start sharing my screen. I didn't time my presentation, so hopefully I don't go over, but like definitely be like, yo, dude, enough. No more tips for me. All right, let me start sharing my screen. And hopefully you can see it. Cool. So can everyone see this version of me? Awesome. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm gonna reduce this. Awesome. Yeah. So I'm gonna walk through just a quick intro. I'm Johan Garcia. I'm a product designer at Facebook. I have to click on that. Yeah. So on my free time, I love working on mobile games, and these are a couple of mobile games that I'm working on. I also love to animate a lot. So I've done these are a few animations that I've done in the past. As a matter of fact, I work at some company that someone just mentioned, doing like explainer videos, this thing called Greenhouse. When they were a tiny little startup, I helped create that like explainer video. So I believe it was Adam. You'd be welcome to know that I work with your founders. And then I moved to like an education company where here in Brooklyn, or not here in Brooklyn, I'm in the Bronx, but over at Brooklyn called Amplify. And there I did animations, but I also moved into some cool little like UX UI stuff. And then I ended up loving product design, and I started working at a digital like UX agency, doing work for like IBM and like other New York type of businesses. And just recently I created an app to help people focus better. And I did it through Flutter, not necessarily React. And that was funny because then I got the job at Facebook and I was like, God damn it, wrong company. Flutter is Google, React is Facebook. So that was a waste of time. So why did I end up spending all that time going through that, right? Like, that's probably what you're thinking. And maybe you're also thinking this, it's just that he's so self-centered. Well, actually, before I this is one of those tips that I kind of give people. I've been doing some interviews. I've done at least 5 apparently getting Facebook people reaching out like, hey, can you do portfolio review? And so I've helped folks from all kind of walks of life, from like getting out of college to like even folks that I even aspired to become in my past life, through their reviews. And I've just noticed some things, and hopefully like, you know, a lot of this is probably going to be apparent and obvious, but like, you know, I just wanted to kind of spend some time going through some of these things that I learned. But that, before I get to this particular tip, it will come back later. Let's clear up something that we're all going to have to deal with. And that is rejection. Rejection hurts, right? It sucks, right? But it's something that is, you know, we don't go from 0 to 1, we go from 0 to shit. Then like we get to where we want to be. And here's just an example of this. This is 2019. And these are all the companies that I applied to that actually had a phone call that I didn't get. And the phone interviews are just like the HR, and then like, you suck. And then I lost that. But you can see here, I even got into like, whenever I got to this stage, that was when I had to give like my portfolio review, and that is when I failed. So I just want to make something very clear that rejection is a thing that we all deal with. It's not something that like is unique to just you. And also like, this is disregarding all of the other companies that said no in an email thread. But let's continue on to the tips. And no, for sure, this is how I felt after I got rejected, which was like, I'll never use any of these products except Spotify. So moving on, tip number 1, the medium matters. This is really kind of important because what I've seen when I've helped folks is they open up their website and start to go through a case study. Now, I understand we put so much love and effort into our websites, and it is beautiful. It is like this beautiful case study of all your hard work. But if we step back, right, a website is not necessarily the right way we present. Just look at the way I'm presenting. Just look at the way you present to stakeholders and at your company. It's usually in the form of a deck. Now, this is weird, but again, I've seen people just show me their websites, and I've been like, ooh, this is what ends up happening when that happens, right? I literally am struggling to like read because it's so text heavy. And then that also then creates this like weird tension where I'm like, oh man, I feel like I'm getting old by seeing all this. So number 1 tip, if you aren't using a deck, please use a deck. And another tip that I would say is, if you have sketch files and you have any like Figma files, consider at some point like showing that within your deck. So consider maybe potentially even switching, because I think here also the medium does matter to understand like, hey, you're actually producing things. And I think that also helps to understand like, okay, you have files. And like, if you don't have files, that sucks. I know like we're restricted to getting files, but like if you do, definitely consider having that. So onwards to tip. So yeah, before I get into tip number 1, I really didn't prepare this. So I was one of them, right? So you can see indeed, I didn't have a deck. And I got to the 5th interview, which was the portfolio review. And I was just like, wait, I failed. What happened? Like, what was the problem? And then looking back, I was like, oh, I didn't have a presentation. And what sucks was Indeed didn't say like, hey, you should have a deck. Facebook, in their interview process, they were like, you should create a deck. So again, if you were one of these folks that was doing it, don't feel that bad. I was one of them, and I've seen other people do it. Not necessarily the best medium. So tip number 2, the pacing, right? This is important because like I kind of want people to think about their presentations like this beautiful song, right? This composition where like the beat is kind of the visual, and the lyrics, the voiceover that you adds to that experience. And the reason why I want you to think about it in this way is that I've seen people's presentations just feel so dense per slide that I'm just like, whoa, this is too much information. And you can imagine what ends up happening is if I see all this text, my eyes just begin to wander and start reading, and I completely ignore everything you're saying. And that's not what you want. You want your decks to be really succinct, small piece of text, beautiful image, because what ends up happening is then we feel engaged. We feel like, okay, I only have this bit of text that is actually getting to the point, and then the person is adding more context to this piece, right? I don't need anything other than a bullet point that says the kind of statement of the deck and an image. And hopefully that's enough. And I would suggest if people like are a little bit weary of this, and I've had like, again, like some of the interviews that I've helped or some portfolio reviews have been really dense, and I've been helping people like, hey, break this up into multiple pieces. But I would look at Pichuk, I don't know how to say that, as inspo. So like, that's a really great way of like people doing presentations with like images and spending a certain amount of time and then jumping from presentation to presentation. Or sorry, from slide to slide, because what I end up feeling is like, it feels so succinct and it actually feels like the time is going faster than like filling that deck. And I wouldn't be helpful if I didn't actually say like what the composition of my case study was. I wish I could show it, but I can't, obviously, for privacy reasons. But essentially, here's just a snapshot of the way I broke it up. And you can imagine that I would spend at least a minute on each of these slides. So for my first case study, and we'll not disregard the second one, it was like roadmap, business problem, surveys, user problem, goals, challenges, project scope, user interviews, insights, initial wires, prototypes, style guide, hi-fi, and then results. And I would be really fast. I would just spend a minute at most, and it would just feel like time flew by. And again, you can use this as a kind of a template, but like definitely break up your slides into succinct little pieces of information. And again, going back to this thing, this timeline, I didn't really, until after I didn't get Etsy, I realized that like, whoa, my pacing was really off. There's too much information. I've started to see the people get bored at some points. And so like, I was like, I need to go back and work on pacing. So yes, if you haven't gotten there yet, definitely it's something that I had to improve within my presentation. So tip number 3, if you can't beat him, try to be him. This one's really hard because I hate presenting. I'm from the Bronx, and I've always felt that the thing about product design is no matter how good of a hypothesis you put forth, you always have to sell it. And I hate selling. I hate being this thing that I'm not, right? I just want to present a solution to a problem. So this has a lot of friction because I just felt like this was a thing that I would not be able to get better at without obviously a lot of doing a lot of interviews. So what I suggest for folks is take a pause on reading some Medium articles, because if you think about it, that is not the correct medium of which you're trying to, when you're doing interviews, right? You're not looking at, and going back to like portfolio reviews, it's a lot of text and it's not necessarily a conversation, right? And what you want to do essentially is start to mimic other people in the sense that like you're, instead of like looking at Medium articles, you're actually going ahead and watching potentially like YouTube design talks. So I highly recommend awards because you can see like product designers, again, giving a lot of talks, and you can try to see like, okay, this is what I need to like, essentially, this is what I need to like pull from this person, or this is why this topic is relevant. This is how this person makes these topics more succinct and more engaging. And then another one is high resolution, which is just the interviews. But I think in watching this, and I'll go to this again, like I'm jumping back here, like I think after Oscar, I was like, okay, my presentation skills aren't that great. I need to emulate other people. And what ended up happening was I started looking at other folks and kind of pulling in some inspiration from like the topics that were pertinent to them, and like being able to then address some of those things in my interviews. So I was literally playing a copycat, but again, we all have to deal with this. We all have to like, in some capacity, get through that like fear of presentation and fear of like, I'm not good enough. And what I highly suggest is people just like go and start watching videos. That really helped me. Tip number 4, optional-ish, be human. So this is a little bit hard, but like I always tell people to try to stand out by adding some form of human or relevant like tidbits when possible. And I'll give you 2 examples of 2 people that I helped. One was they were working on this Luminary product on Alexa. What is that, like portal? Not the portal, like with the screen. And in their presentation, they had a podcast, Guys We Effed. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. it was very interesting to see that in the design. And he just skimmed over that. And there I was like, hey, maybe you could potentially add a plug where you can say, hey, you know, if you haven't heard of this podcast, I highly suggest it. It's really entertaining. Or just add some relevant piece of information. And I'll use another example. Someone was working on another case study that someone else was working on. She was working on like this video conferencing app. And I was helping her like a few months ago during this whole pandemic. And she completely glossed over the fact that like, we're all dealing with video and like, we all know how crappy it could be. Maybe that was an excellent plug to be like, yeah, you know, here are the issues that we all deal with, and add some human layer, because in the end, what we want to feel is essentially this, right? We want to feel kind of human. Because if you take it for like, if you look at our perspective, we're literally giving you an hour to go through your portfolio reviews. And it is painful when there is just a monotone / no humor added. Like this to me makes people stand out so much over those that don't add anything. Because in the end, I want to hire someone who I want to work with, right? So definitely recommend adding humor. And back to those intro slides that I did, it wasn't really until after Etsy that I realized, okay, my kind of presentation is really dry. I have this wealth of stuff that that makes me. Why not introduce it into this presentation? And that's why, again, I showed you those intro slides, because it is very helpful to add that layer of humanity, right? And so tip number 5 is rejection. There's different stages of rejection, and I'll try to go this quickly. I'm not sure if I'm at time, but like the first stage, you know, we feel depressed, we feel shitty when we didn't get that. It feels sickening. The second stage is anger, right? We're always just like pissed. When I didn't get Indeed, I was just like, what the, or not, yes, Indeed, I was like, what the fuck? It's their fault. I hate them. And then it was only until like someone actually reached out and was like, hey, Johan, take a step back, maybe look at it from a different lens, right? Look at it from like a product improvements perspective. It's just that you're the product, right? And this one's a little bit hard because it's not always going to be your fault. It's not always going to be you the reason why. It's maybe there's another player that was a lot just better at it overall. But I think it's hard to get stuck. It's easy to get stuck here, and it's even harder to like move to this stage, which I think is really important. And that is admitting that it's kind of my fault. And like, even though if it's not your fault, I think we all have to at this stage admit that it is, because if we don't admit, we can't then do this thing, which is improve, right? Like what we want to do is look back at the mistakes that we made or areas of improvement. Because if I just stuck with Indeed and I said, well, my presentation was good, it's their fault, I would have never gotten to the state where I am now, which is improving that. And again, like one thing I recommend is, and this is hard to say, but like apply to as many gigs as possible and use it as a learning experience, no matter how crappy the job is, because this will help you get in this state. And here, just to be very clear, this is a timeline, right? So like after I didn't get Dropbox, I got Facebook. But you can see here that I still continued to interview, even though that's a shitty thing for me to do. I still did it because I thought that there was more improvement to be had. And like you can see Handy even rejected me. I think I was too lackadaisical. But even they rejected me because I don't think like I came from an agency. And so like I didn't have full on product experience. But it's very good to like continue this pattern of like interviewing. And I just want to say that like, yeah, use yourself as like, we love learning, building, and measuring. Try to look at yourself as a product that can improve after any sort of rejection, right? Because that's the way that you will hopefully get to a better state. And that is all. That is my presentation. I am Johan. Here's just one of the gifs that I did after a year of hiatus. You can find me over there at my Instagram, and you can reach out at hi@joegarcia.com, and I'll try to help as much folks as possible with their portfolio reviews, but hopefully that was helpful in some capacity. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Does anybody have any questions or thoughts?
That was really great, by the way. Thank you. I had never thought of the deck idea. That was pretty genius.
I really wanted Indeed. That was kind of my dream job because it was in Tokyo. But the deck, yeah, the deck.
Yeah, I'll chime in with I hadn't thought about using a deck before, and I thought that was really helpful and definitely something I'm going to implement.
You had mentioned being from the Bronx as something that was not a good thing, or I'm not sure I heard you right. Like you had said something about being from the Bronx. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's hard because I didn't have a good education, so I always thought like, you know, I was never going to be able to be this great presenter. In the fact that like some of my coworkers would come from prestigious schools and they would just be great at like presenting. And what I've noticed was, you know, I might not have a good education, but I have humor. So I kind of utilize that to actually engage with people and get buy-in more. And I've done that throughout my career. So I do think like, yeah, it does suck because we do need to be great presenters. We need to sell our ideas. And that's why I definitely recommend like go and watch a bunch of people talking and literally try to copy them. And that's exactly what I did during that whole year. But yeah, no, I think like it sucks in part because like, you know, things like systemic racism and not having access to good education system were in place. But you do with what you have, and hopefully that's helpful for folks who still feel like they're not great presenters, which I know a lot of us do.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, that I'm on the phone, so I was only able to hear you. I wasn't able to see the, you know, presentation. But if you didn't say anything about anything, like if you didn't, you know, talk about your lack of presentation skills or anything else, I never would have gotten the impression that you were not a good presenter, because I think that you are, and I thought that you know, everything that you had to say was, you know, really relevant and very, you know, interesting. So I just want to say, as a person that doesn't know you and I've never met you before, that there's nothing about you that's not a good presenter. So I think that you are a really good presenter is basically what I'm trying to say, and I just want to let you know that.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to say, like, yeah, never think you're not good enough, because I did that for a lot of my life. You are. You just need to keep at it. That's a recommendation.
I have a question. Did you learn it by yourself, autodidact in product design, or did you go to those boot camps or school or something?
Animation, and I think I switched over when the bubble was happening. I was like, there's this thing called UX and they're paying a lot, so I'm going to drop the thing that I'm really passionate about and jump over here. And that was back in 2013. So I kind of got in early, but I will say 100%, if you don't have case studies, I've lied about everything in my presentation. As long as you're confident that you can do the job, it's okay to throw in white lies. And I recommend that for everyone.
Oh my
White
God,
lies
that
are
is so hard.
Yeah, it is so hard because you need to follow it up. But that's why you watch a lot of interviews.
Yes.
Because then it's almost like you become these people, and it's so helpful to be like, I can answer that question because like I've watched 10 other interviews that kind of address a similar thing. So that's why I think like the videos are really helpful. And just have confidence, like, you know, you can answer the question in some capacity.
So did you make up the case studies, or you?
Yes. Don't tell that to Facebook, and this is being recorded. But I did add a lot of like other people's work that I said I did and I took on. So you don't need to be 100% honest. Again, white lies are helpful. It's just be confident that like, you know, you get the job, you can do the work. And yeah, definitely a lot of white lies within the case study.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Hopefully Zuck is not listening in.
No.
Cool. Thank you so much. If there are any additional questions, I do want to keep us like moving along for our last presenter of tonight, which I have never met him in person, but we've actually, because of COVID and the quarantines, we've gotten to know each other a lot. So I'm happy to present Jonathan Martinez, and he is a product designer at Noel Company, and he's going to be giving us an impromptu UX talk.
All right, what's up? Thanks for the intro, Sam. What's up, everybody? My name is Jonathan Martinez. I pronounce it with a Spanish accent, so I hope y'all like that. Most people who know me on the internet call me JM. I'm JM the Creative on social media. Sam saw something on social media that interests her. I was doing Instagram stories, and something I was talking about was interesting to her, and she said, "Hey, why don't you come and do a talk for a meetup?" And I'm like, I don't really know what to talk about. I didn't have anything planned at all. That's why I called it Impromptu Talk. And I'm here right now to just kind of talk, do like a 5-minute rant. I won't take up too much of your time. I think I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome, though, because it's easy to have imposter syndrome right now. You got people coming on here presenting from Facebook, presenting all type of technical things, and I just had nothing prepared. I have no slides, nothing like that. And I think at the root of imposter syndrome is perfectionism, right? Because I could have just been a perfectionist and try to work on something to the T and focus on how am I gonna deliver this awesome value back to them? I'm reading a book about imposter syndrome right now too. Haven't gotten too far, maybe read like 2 or 3 pages, but so far it's really good. And I was even thinking about coming on here and just bringing something from the book, like the 3 C's of how to conquer imposter syndrome. But I can't be a perfectionist right now because I didn't even read that part, so I can't bring that to you guys. This is, I don't even really know what to talk about, to be honest, but feel free to chime in and just ask me anything, for right now in these 5 minutes, and I'll just answer whatever questions I got. What's the name of the book that I mentioned? It's called Overcoming Your Greatness. That's what it's called. It's called Overcoming Your Greatness. It's written by a woman that she's like a psychologist, but forgive me for not knowing the high level term, because it's a high level psychological term that she's does in her role. So I'm not really too sure. Thank you. All right, cool. I mean, y'all could unmute yourselves too. You don't have to just, comment in the chat. You just unmute yourself, ask me anything.
So can you tell us about a time when you may have experienced it? Or actually that question kind of goes to anybody.
Yeah, a time where I experienced imposter syndrome. Right now I'm experiencing imposter syndrome. Right now, I'm here on the Zoom call, and there's just a lot of people working at big companies, been working in tech for a long time. So yeah, definitely. But I think it's important to own. One of the things that they were talking about in the book that I can remember really briefly was just owning. Even though I don't know everything to the T, it's you have to be able to own how you feel about things, own your own insecurities, own who you are, be yourself. Like the dude in the what's his name? Johan? Is that his name? The last presenter?
Yes.
Johan. Yeah, what's up, man? Shout out to you. You're from the Bronx. Too. I grew up in the Bronx.
Photo.
And a lot of what you was talking about is about imposter syndrome, Oh, you from Fordham? Okay. Yeah, I'm from the North Bronx, all the way up there, by Dye Avenue. That's where I grew up. I went to school in Co-op City. It's zone. You're talking about how education is not very good. I don't think it's that the education is not very good, because right now I live in Orlando, and over here they don't have the education we have in New York. But I say it's the dangerous environments that you gotta overcome. They got a lot of bad kids in gangs and stuff. And you're trying to learn, So if you're not in the good class, if you're not in the top class, it's really hard to get out of that environment, So yeah, man, I appreciate you. I appreciate your talk for sure. you know. Does anybody else have anything to add, man? I don't want to be cricket show in here.
I can add that, like, when I did the interview process, it's 4 interviews. At the second stage, I thought I didn't get it. And I remember just doing a presentation and just everyone's faces being super serious. And then I did the one-on-one, and then that was awful. And then I was just like, well, I didn't get it. Fuck it. And I remember going into the next 2, just like with the fuck it mentality, where like it was like a portfolio or design critique section. And I was asking her questions. I was like, oh, what do you think is going to happen when I click on this? And she was like, this has never happened. But I was in a state where I'm like, I don't care anymore because I didn't get it. And I felt awful. And to add to that, when I first joined, they were talking about metrics and all these goals and stuff. And I was just like, what the, like, I was like, why am I here? I don't belong here. I'm looking around and I'm the only Hispanic person here. And I'm just like, what like, this is like, I was feeling so anxious because there was just so much expectation. And I think one nice thing that they did was they did all that on purpose so that at the very end, 3 people walked in, very prestigious folks at Facebook. And then they were like, when we started, we were in your position. We were scared. We were worried. We were anxious. We were nervous. We didn't think we would be good enough and all these other things. It's like everyone experiences that in some capacity. And it is extremely hard for folks to get over that. But I do think it's something that we all deal with, and we all should just very, very much own up to it. And I think it's great that you like bringing that up.
Yeah, I appreciate that response. And something that stood out to me, what you said just now, was like, you didn't really care anymore. You know, I think that's the difference. You didn't really care anymore. And from that came a confidence that they were like, oh man, you know, this guy, he really knows what he's talking about, even if you really didn't know what you was talking about. For sure.
I guess I have something to add as well. So the last like almost 2 years I was, you know, part of, like, I had my own startup and we were trying to do this thing. And I think, you know, when you're, it's very interesting because all throughout this time I'm like, you know, no one's gonna take me seriously, you know, like there's all these other startups out there doing other like much more amazing things, and I'm like, y'all, I'm trying to add augmented reality in the game. That's all I'm trying to do. Like, it's not solving any, I'm not solving any like systemic issues that's like affecting the world. So I'm like, man, no one's gonna take it seriously. Like, I feel like such a fraud. Like, and these are all like actual thoughts I had. And I think by the time I had to do the first pitch to people about what I was working on was kind of like, you know, first of all, the first time I did the pitch, it was unanimous. Everyone's like, that was horrible. Which is cool, you know, there's nowhere to go but up when that was horrible is the baseline. Right. So I worked with some of, you know, the startup advisors through this program that I was a part of, and my team and I like fine-tuned it and really was able to tell the story about our startup. I think one of the most impactful pieces of advice that was given to me, and maybe this is helpful for everyone, but you know, when you're on stage, you are the expert, right? You are the expert. I mean, the whole reason you're on stage is you are the expert. So, you know, this one piece of advice like really helped me like overcome a lot of that. And, you know, obviously practicing the pitch nonstop for like a week helped as well. But really it's like, you know, the reason you're on stage is because you're the expert. So it's kind of like taking that in our interviews. I know we had a lot of talk about like interviews today. When you're in the interview, you're the expert, right? So besides the other piece of golden advice, like fake it till you make it, just remember, just like when you're on deck, you're the expert. And I think, you know, that really helped. That really helped me. So just wanted to chime in there with that.
Man, that was awesome. I appreciate that, Brian. See, I got the opening up about imposter syndrome. Who wants to go next? Opening up about imposter syndrome. I'll just turn my talk into a therapy session.
I can go next.
Yes.
So we're about to stop recording if just to
yes.
privacy.
All right, I'm gonna stop recording now.
Oh,
Yeah.
yay, on my turn. Yay.
Now let's get